In the world of professional sports, there are stories of triumph, of legendary feats, and of dynasties that seem to last forever. But beneath the bright lights and the cheering crowds, there are other stories. Ghost stories, tales of incredible promise cut short, of dreams that turn to dust in an instant. These are the stories that remind us how fragile it all is. Imagine for a moment that you've spent your entire life working for one thing. You've endured bruising years in the minor leagues, grueling bus rides through forgotten towns, and fought tooth and nail just to be noticed. Then, one day, it arrives. A contract. Not just any contract, but one from the Montreal Canadiens, the most storied franchise in hockey, the New York Yankees of their sport. It's your ticket, your validation, the key to a future you've bled for. You're 26 years old, in the prime of your life, with a wife and 2 small children who can now share in that dream. The world is at your feet. For a tough-as-nails hockey player from Oshawa, Ontario named Ross Lowe, this wasn't a fantasy. In the summer of 1955, it was his reality. He held that contract in his hands. He was a Montreal Canadien, but the ink was barely dry when he went on a simple fishing trip with a couple of friends. It was a day of leisure, a final taste of summer before the grueling work of an NHL training camp began. He never came home. The story of Ross Lowe isn't about Stanley Cups or Hall of Fame speeches. It's a haunting story about what might have been, a story of a man who reached the absolute summit of his profession, only to have it all washed away in the dark waters of a quiet lake, leaving behind a ghost in the machine of a legendary dynasty. To understand Ross Lowe's journey, you have to understand the world that forged him. This was post-war Canada, a nation shaking off the shadow of global conflict and building a new industrial identity. And nowhere was that identity more concentrated than in his hometown of Oshawa, Ontario. Known as the Motor City of the North, Oshawa was a quintessential company town, its heartbeat tied to the rhythms of the massive General Motors plant that dominated its landscape and its economy. It was a blue-collar city, filled with hard-working families who valued toughness, loyalty, and a no-nonsense approach to life. For the boys growing up there in the 1930s and 40s, life often presented 2 paths: a future on the factory floor at GM, or the near-impossible dream of escaping through hockey. Hockey in this era was more than a sport. It was a religion and a potential lifeline. The National Hockey League consisted of only 6 teams, the now legendary Original Six: the Montreal Canadiens, Toronto Maple Leafs, Boston Bruins, New York Rangers, Chicago Blackhawks, and Detroit Red Wings. With so few spots available, the competition was beyond fierce. The system was almost feudal. NHL teams sponsored junior hockey programs across the country, essentially creating a farm system where they could identify and control talent from a young age. If a boy showed promise, he would be asked to sign something called a C form. This simple piece of paper bound him to that NHL organization for life. He became their property. The team would dictate where he played, when he played, and for how much. It was a system of absolute control designed to keep player salaries low and ensure a steady stream of talent for the parent club. Ross Lowe, like thousands of other Canadian boys, grew up in this world where the dream of the NHL was intertwined with a reality of servitude to the team that owned your rights. Ross Lowe was born in 1928, a child of the looming Great Depression, raised in a world where nothing was given and everything was earned. He was a product of Oshawa, strong, rugged, and naturally drawn to the rink. He began his serious hockey career with the local powerhouse, the Oshawa Generals. The Generals were the jewel of the Ontario Hockey Association, and, crucially, they were sponsored by the Boston Bruins. This meant that from the moment Ross Lowe showed enough talent to make the team as a teenager, his fate was sealed. He signed the C form. He was Bruins property. He wasn't a flashy goal-scoring phenom. He wasn't the kind of player who would dance through opposing teams and end up on the front page of the sports section. He was something else. Something just as valuable in the trenches of 1940s hockey. He was a two-way forward, a player who was as committed to preventing goals as he was to scoring them, and he was tough. In an era where clutching, grabbing, and fighting were integral parts of the game, Lowe carved out a reputation as a player you didn't mess with. He was a protector, a policeman who would answer the bell for any cheap shot taken against his more skilled teammates. After graduating from junior hockey, his professional journey began, but not in Boston. Like most prospects, he was sent to the minor leagues to hone his craft and prove his worth. This was the start of the grind. For the next several years, Ross Lowe became a journeyman, a nomad in the vast, tough world of minor league hockey. He played for the Hershey Bears in the American Hockey League, one of the top farm leagues. Then he was sent to the St. Louis Flyers. Year after year, he put up respectable numbers, a decent amount of goals and assists, but always a high number of penalty minutes. That penalty total was his calling card. It told every coach and player in the league that Ross Lowe was not to be trifled with. His career took a pivotal turn when he landed with the Springfield Indians of the AHL. The Indians were coached by one of the most feared and eccentric figures in hockey history, the legendary defenseman Eddie Shore. Shore was a Hall of Famer as a player, but as a coach and owner, he was a notorious tyrant. He was known for his bizarre and brutal training methods, his penny pinching, and his relentless, almost sadistic demands on his players. He would have them practice for hours without pucks, force them to perform manual labor around the rink, and bench them for the slightest perceived mistake. Playing for Eddie Shore was a form of hockey boot camp, and many talented players washed out, unable to handle his psychological warfare. But Ross Lowe didn't just survive under Eddie Shore, he thrived. Shore's emphasis on toughness, conditioning, and defensive responsibility perfectly matched Lowe's own style. He became one of Shore's most trusted players, a leader on the ice who embodied the coach's hard-nosed philosophy. The 1954 to 1955 season was the culmination of all his hard work. Lowe had a breakout year, becoming one of the premier defensive forwards in the entire league. He was a force to be reckoned with, and his efforts were recognized when he was named a first-team AHL All-Star. At 26 years old, after years of toiling in the minors, Ross Lowe was officially one of the best players outside the NHL. And the big league finally noticed. Specifically, Frank Selke, the brilliant eagle-eyed general manager of the Montreal Canadiens, took notice. The Canadiens of the mid-1950s were on the cusp of becoming the greatest dynasty in hockey history. They were loaded with dazzling offensive superstars, the fiery, unstoppable Maurice, the Rocket Richard, the elegant and prolific Jean Béliveau, the lightning-fast Bernie Boom Boom Geoffrion. They could score goals at a breathtaking pace, but Selke knew that his skilled players were taking a beating every night. They needed protection. They needed a tough, smart, defensive forward who could shadow the other team's top scorers and create space for his own stars to work their magic. They needed a policeman. They needed Ross Lowe. In the summer of 1955, a deal was struck. The Boston Bruins, who still owned Lowe's rights, traded him to the Montreal Canadiens. For Lowe, this was the moment. He wasn't just going to the NHL, he was going to the best team in the NHL. He was being handpicked to play a crucial role on a championship-caliber team. Frank Selke sent him the contract. It wasn't the multi-million-dollar deal of today's athletes. It was a modest one-year contract, likely for a few $1,000s, but its value was immeasurable. It was a ticket to the show. The dream, after so many years, was finally real. While hockey defined his professional life, it's what he was fighting for at home that truly humanizes his story. Ross Lowe wasn't just a hockey player, he was a husband and a father. He was married to his wife Joan, and they had two very young children. Their son, Michael, was 3 years old, and their daughter Patricia was just 1. For them, that Montreal contract meant everything. It meant financial stability. It meant an end to the uncertainty of the minor leagues. It meant moving to a vibrant city and starting a new, exciting chapter of their lives. For a hockey player in the 1950s, the off-season wasn't a time for luxurious vacations. Most players had to work summer jobs to make ends meet. Ross was no different, working as a sales representative. His life was a balancing act between his identity as a hard-nosed athlete and his role as a provider for his young family. The dream he had just secured was not just his own. It was theirs. The future looked brighter than it ever had before. That bright future makes the events of August 26, 1955, all the more tragic. It was a Friday, a typical late summer day in Ontario. Lowe and two friends, 36-year-old Don Farrow and 25-year-old Keith Walton, decided to go fishing. It was a simple day of recreation, a chance to relax before the intensity of NHL life began. They took a small 12-foot aluminum boat out onto Lake Haliburton, a large but relatively shallow lake near Port Perry, about an hour's drive from Oshawa. The lake was calm when they set out, but Lake Haliburton, like many large, shallow lakes, is notoriously deceptive. The weather can turn in an instant. In the late afternoon, a sudden violent squall blew in. The wind howled, and the calm water was whipped into a dangerous, churning frenzy. Their small boat was no match for the fury of the storm. It was swamped by the waves and capsized, throwing all three men into the turbulent, cold water. There was no one else around to see them. There was no one to hear their cries for help. All three men, including the powerful, athletic Ross Lowe, who was in peak physical condition, drowned in the violent waters of the lake. The suddenness of it is hard to comprehend. One moment, they were three friends enjoying a summer afternoon. The next, they were gone. Back on shore, as evening fell and they failed to return, the alarm was raised. A search began immediately, but the storm and the darkness hampered their efforts. The next morning, the tragic scope of the accident became clear. Searchers found the overturned boat. Soon after, they recovered the bodies of Don Farrow and Keith Walton, but Ross Lowe was still missing. For 2 more agonizing days, police and local volunteers scoured the lake. The community of Oshawa held its breath, hoping against hope for a miracle. Finally, on Sunday afternoon, they found him. The dream was over. The man who had just become a Montreal Canadien was dead at the age of 26. In the world of sports, we often debate legacies. We argue about statistics, championships, and a player's place in the pantheon of greats. But what about a legacy that was never written? The story of Ross Lowe is defined not by what happened, but by the great agonizing question of what might have been. This is the central, haunting debate of his life. Was he truly destined for greatness, or was he just another role player? On one side of the argument, you have the vision of Frank Selke, one of the keenest minds in hockey history. Selke didn't acquire players by accident. He saw Lowe as a specific necessary piece for his championship puzzle. The Canadiens were about to embark on a record-setting run of 5 consecutive Stanley Cups, from 1956 to 1960. Many believe Lowe would have been an integral part of that dynasty. His role would have been to shadow opposing stars like Detroit's Gordie Howe or Toronto's Ted Kennedy, to be a physical deterrent and to win puck battles in the corners, allowing Montreal's skilled forwards to flourish. In that role, he could have become a celebrated and crucial component of one of hockey's greatest teams. His name etched on the Stanley Cup 5 times. On the other side, there's the harsh reality of the NHL. It's a league that chews up and spits out even the most talented players. Lowe was 26, which was not old, but it was past the age of a typical rookie. It's possible he might have been a good player, but not a great one. He might have served as a 3rd or 4th line checker for a few seasons before being replaced by a younger, faster prospect. In this version of history, he is a footnote, a solid professional who had a respectable but unremarkable career. There is no right answer, and that is the core of the tragedy. He never got the chance to prove either side right or wrong. His potential remains frozen in time, a source of endless speculation for hockey historians. The only other controversy lies in the quiet, unspoken reality of the era. In 1955, there was no players' union, no support system for families. When a player died, especially one who had yet to even play a single game for the team, what was the club's obligation? The Canadiens, a business, had lost an asset. They mourned his passing, but they had to move on. They had a team to run and a championship to win. For his widow, Joan, and her 2 small children, the loss was absolute. The promise of a secure future vanished overnight. They were left to navigate a world without their husband and father. The modest dream they had so briefly held turned into a devastating nightmare. This wasn't a controversy of malice, but one of systemic indifference, a reflection of a colder, harder time in the world of professional sports. The immediate consequence of Ross Lowe's death for the Montreal Canadiens was a hole in their lineup. They had to find another player to fill the tough, defensive role they had envisioned for him. They moved on, and as history shows, they were wildly successful. They won the Stanley Cup that very season, the first of 5 in a row. It's a strange and somber thought. The greatest dynasty in hockey history began with a ghost in its machine. Every cheer, every victory, every hoisted cup during that 5-year run has the faint, invisible shadow of Ross Lowe hovering over it. His absence is a silent, poignant part of their legendary story. But his greater significance lies in what he represents. He is a symbol for all the athletes whose stories are told in the language of what if. For every superstar whose name we know, there are 100 Ross Lowes, players who had the talent, the drive, and the character, but were denied their chance by a cruel twist of fate, a bad injury, or just plain bad luck. He is an unknown soldier in the long, brutal war of professional sports. His story forces us to look beyond the box scores and the highlight reels, and to see the human beings behind the jerseys. It reminds us that these players are not just assets on a team roster. They are sons, husbands, and fathers with families and dreams that extend far beyond the ice. The story of Ross Lowe is a cautionary tale about the fragility of life and the brutal randomness of destiny. It's a lesson that you can do everything right, work hard, persevere, be a good teammate, and earn your shot, and still have it all taken away in a single, unscripted moment. His name may not be in the Hockey Hall of Fame, but his story is a vital and heartbreaking part of the sport's rich tapestry, a somber reminder of the human cost that often lies hidden beneath the glory. In the end, we are left with the heartbreaking image of a contract, a paper promise of a brilliant future. Ross Lowe was a man who climbed the mountain. He came from the factory town of Oshawa, battled through the brutal minor leagues, and earned a spot on the most glamorous team in hockey. He reached the summit, and for a few short weeks in the summer of 1955, he must have been able to see the future stretching out before him, bright and full of promise for himself and his young family. The tragedy of Ross Lowe is not simply that a hockey player died, it's that a dream died, a future for a family vanished. He is a ghost, not because his life was unfulfilled, but because it was so tantalizingly close to its grandest fulfillment. His story serves as a profound and somber reminder that the most important games are not played on the ice, and that the greatest victories and losses happen in the quiet, unguarded moments of life itself. In the silent, dark waters of Lake Halliburton, more than a man was lost. A future was erased, leaving behind one of hockey's most haunting and poignant ghost stories.